Chapter 2, Guidelines for a Healthy Diet. So this chapter we're going to review government recommendations designed for individual health as well as public health. They're used to plan diets and to evaluate what we're eating both as individuals and as a nation. So, why is this important? Today, most public health agencies provide valuable information regarding healthy food choices. However, this information isn't always understood or used properly. As portion sizes grow, so do people's waistlines and our attention to health concerns. So long ago, nourishment meant survival. People ate to survive. They learned what foods to eat, what foods not to eat. So did they eat that berry? Did it kill you? Did they drink that water from a poor source that could have been fatal? As societies evolved, dietary cautions went from taboos to laws and then now to recommendations. Governments all over the world, including the World Health Organization, have been providing what we would call modern nutrition information for over the past 150 years. British Royal Society determined that a healthy workforce required a healthy diet, not necessarily the cheapest diet, so fruits, vegetables, and milk became elements of nutritional guidance. And since then, every nation has sought to establish dietary standards for its citizens. This prevents micronutrient deficiencies and promotes a healthy workforce. Nutrition recommendations. I hope that this picture looks familiar to most of you. It's the new and most current dietary guidelines for Americans. It's Choose MyPlate, and we're going to go into great detail on this. And you are going to compare your diet as part of our semester project to the dietary guidelines and nutritional recommendations. Past, present U.S. food recommendations. This goes back as far as 1894, talking about the USDA recommending protein, fats, carbohydrates, and mineral matter in a specific amount. Going forward to 1917, U.S. food recommendations were based on how to select foods, giving the 5 food groups: meat and milk, cereals, vegetables and fruits, fats and fatty foods, sugar and sugary foods. Moving forward to the 1940s, Food and Nutrition Board established the RDAs, or the recommended dietary allowances for specific nutrients. So food guides were developed by the United States Department of Agriculture to translate nutrient intake recommendations into recommended food choices. I think it's important to review U.S. food recommendations from the 50s forward. Very often, as allied health professionals are working with clients or patients with different generations, they all learned food recommendations in elementary school and high school, and what they learned may be very different than what you learned. In the 50s, they were taught the basic 4 food groups. In the late 70s, Hassle-Free Dairy Food Guide. In the mid-1980s, the Food Wheel. In the 1990s, the Food Guide Pyramid, and that later changed to the My Pyramid, and now in 2011 to the MyPlate dietary guidelines. So why is it important to know all the different dietary recommendations? Those were old and now we have something new. But even though these recommendations exist, many people don't follow them, or they don't understand them, or they don't know how to apply these recommendations to their daily lives. They don't even know really what they mean. Most of the time, our food choices are influenced by the foods we like to eat, the advertisements we see on television, how much food costs, the availability of food, more than by the effects on health. Over the years since those first standards were developed, dietary habits and disease patterns have changed, and dietary recommendations have had to change along with them. Nutritional deficiencies are now rare in the United States, but the incidence of nutrition-related chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, and obesity have increased. To combat these more recent health concerns, recommendations are now intended to promote health as well as prevent diseases. The original RDAs have been expanded into the dietary reference intakes, which address problems of excess as well as deficiencies. And the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, introduced in the 1980s, are set to make diet and lifestyle recommendations that promote health and reduce the risk of obesity and chronic disease. Nutritional status. So a person's, an individual, or a population's health is influenced by the food they intake and the use of the nutrients that a person or a population takes in. So when evaluating the nutritional status of a population, food intake can be assessed by having individuals record or recall their food intake, or by using information about the amounts and types of food available to a population to identify trends in diets. And then this data can be evaluated in conjunction with information about the health and nutritional status of individuals in the population, and then relationships between what people eat or their dietary intake and health and disease can be identified. And the reason this is important is this is how public health policies and programs that address nutritional problems can be developed. For example, the NHANES study is probably the longest running study that the government uses to determine food policies and food intake of individuals and populations. This particular study collects diet and health information and has helped public health officials recognize that in the early 40s that low iron intake was a problem for many people, including women, children, elderly people, and this led to the fortification of grain products with iron beginning in the 1940s. Most recently, the NHANES data has shown that the number of calories Americans are consuming per day has increased over the past few decades, and the incidence of obesity has increased dramatically during the same period. And this has led to public health experts to develop programs to improve both the diet and the fitness of Americans. The information obtained from population health and nutrition surveys is also used to determine whether a nation is meeting health and nutrition goals, such as those established by the Healthy People here. And this sets health promotion and disease prevention objectives, and it's revised every 10 years. The goal is to increase the quality and the length of healthy lives for the population as a whole, and to eliminate health disparities among different segments of the population. The latest version of these objectives has been released as the Healthy People 2020, and the long-term goal is to create a social climate in which everyone has a chance to live long, healthy lives. So how do we determine someone's typical food intake? People's typical food intake can be evaluated by having them record their food as they consume it, or to recall what they've eaten during the past day or so. Because food intake varies from day to day, to obtain a realistic picture of an individual's intake, it should be monitored for more than at least one day, because it might be a weekend day, a holiday, a birthday, an anniversary. So when evaluating completing a food diary, we typically like to do that for several days. And an accurate food record includes the amounts of all foods, including beverages consumed, along with the descriptions of how it was cooked or the brand names of products. And it's often difficult to obtain an accurate record because people may change what they're eating because they're recording it and they think someone's looking at it, or they may forget what they ate when trying to recall it. So each of you are going to participate in keeping a 2-day food diary. And the biggest challenges that I see in that is that people will write, for example, that they ate eggs and they were scrambled and not the amount. And they won't put that they put butter in their eggs, or that they ate toast and was it whole wheat, white, rye, and how many slices did they eat, and did they put anything on it? Butter, jelly, milk, was it non-fat milk, was it whole milk, was it cream that you put in your coffee, and how much? A cup, 8 ounces, or orange juice? Was it fresh, was it frozen, did you have a whole orange? And then for lunch, here's a good example. A Big Mac from McDonald's is one, but someone might say, I had spaghetti. Well, everybody makes their spaghetti different. So what was in your spaghetti? Was there meat sauce? Was there meatballs? How many ounces of meat? How was it a whole plate of pasta? How many cups? Was it a cream sauce? Was it a tomato sauce? And what was the portion size? So it's very important when you complete your food diary that you record all the food and beverages you eat, and you include the food and how it was prepared and the amount you ate, and if there's a brand name, what it was, and to include, be as specific as possible. That allows your nutrient analysis to be much more accurate, so you can see if you're deficient in vitamins or minerals or nutrients, if you're over on your sodium or cholesterol or fat, or if you're under on your iron and your calcium, your vitamin A or your vitamin C. When assessing nutritional status after someone has kept a food intake diary, this can be done, and you can compare an individual's food intake to the recommendations against MyPlate, and that's what each of the students in the class are going to do. A more thorough analysis is done using this program, and it compares nutrient intake, your actual nutrient intake, to recommendations. In this example, it shows only a few nutrients, so we can see that intake of vitamin A, iron, and calcium is below the recommended amounts, and intakes of vitamin C and saturated fat is above the recommended amounts. And what you're going to learn throughout the class is what nutrients need to be at the recommendations, or above, or below, and how your nutrient intake will affect your own personal nutritional status. Assessing one's nutritional status also involves evaluating physical health. So a physical examination helps detect signs of nutrient deficiencies or excesses. So measuring a body's dimensions, such as height and weight, can be monitored over time and compared with standards like BMIs or growth charts for children, which are for populations, and any drastic changes in measurements that are significantly above or below the standards could indicate nutritional deficiencies or excesses. Part of assessing nutritional status also considers your medical history or your lifestyle. So the health pre-assessment questionnaire, you can see why it was important for that questionnaire to include some of the probing questions that it did. So personal and family medical histories are important because genetic risk factors affect yours or populations, but specifically an individual's risk of developing a nutrition-related chronic disease. For example, if you have high cholesterol and your father died of a heart attack at age 50, you have a higher than average risk of developing heart disease. And lifestyle factors such as physical activity level and eating habits can add to or reduce your inherited risk of these nutrition and physical activity related diseases. Assessing nutritional status also may include an assessment that involves laboratory tests. So measurements of nutrients, their byproducts, or their function in the blood, urine, or body cells can help detect nutrient deficiencies and excesses or the risk of nutrition-related chronic diseases. For instance, an individual's iron status can be assessed by drawing a blood sample, measuring hemoglobin, which is an iron-carrying protein, and hematocrit, which is the proportion of blood volume that is red blood cells, and then comparing those values to the healthy range. I know several people mentioned that they had been diagnosed with iron deficiency anemia, so osteoporosis can be detected through the blood, cholesterol can be detected through laboratory tests. There is a variety of laboratory tests that are done by a physician that assess the nutritional status of an individual. Dietary reference intakes. What are the purpose of the DRIs? Dietary reference intakes are the recommendations for the amount of energy, nutrients, and other food components for individuals and populations. They were created to keep people healthy, decrease the risk of chronic diseases, to help prevent deficiencies. We talked a little bit about that iron deficiency. Someone might have vitamin D deficiency. And they're set for gender and various life stages. The most common dietary reference intakes that you hear is what's the RDA for protein? What's the RDA for the amount of fiber intake? That's the most common one that you hear, but there are actually 4 types of nutrient intake recommendations that are considered the DRIs, and 2 of them relate to recommendations for energy intake. Because gender and life stage affect nutrient needs, you might need more or less, depending if you're male or female, if you're old or young, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. There needs to be differences in the nutrient needs for all of those different populations. So let's break the dietary reference intakes into 4 sets of values. So the first one is the EARs, so not the ears, the EARs they're referred to. And basically that means the nutrient intake's estimated to meet the needs of 50% of the healthy individuals in a given gender and life stage group. So an EAR is the average, 50%, the average amount of a nutrient required for good health. If everyone in the population consumed this amount, only 50% would obtain enough of the nutrient to meet their requirements. And how that makes sense is if everybody ate a certain amount of protein, a specific amount, say 40 grams a day, that might not be enough for some populations, maybe for an active teen, or it might be too much for a 2-year-old, or maybe not enough for a marathon runner. So if everyone ate 40 grams of protein, and the entire population, no matter their gender, their life stage group, their fitness level, it would only meet 50% of their needs of that entire population group, so the EARs. And the reason those are used, and that helps us assess a population's nutritional adequacy, but it's not appropriate for an individual's intake. So the second set of values that are part of the dietary reference intake include the RDAs, and that's probably what most people have heard of. The RDAs are the nutrient intake sufficient to meet the needs of healthy individuals within a gender or life stage group, so male or female, and are they a woman, are they an infant, a child, an adolescent, adults, older adults, are they pregnant, or are they breastfeeding? And they are set higher than the EARs, and they are the amounts of nutrients and foods that will meet the needs of most healthy people. So that's why you hear about this more commonly. And they are the amounts people should consume on an average over several days a week. And they're set a little bit higher to give a safety factor. As compared to the EARs, they're about, about 97% of the population, if they eat this amount, it will meet their needs. And so that's how it is different than the EAR is set at a lower level, but the RDA is set to meet about 97% of the population's need. If nutrient intake meets the RDA, the risk of deficiency is very low. But as intake falls, the risk of deficiency increases. The third set of values for the dietary reference intakes, or DRIs, is the adequate intakes, or the AIs. And this is established when there isn't enough data about nutrient requirements to establish an RDA. They're meant to represent the amounts that most healthy people should consume. So this is in the person with a chronic disease. So on average over several days or even weeks, not each and every day. And they're set high enough to meet the needs of almost all healthy people. And intake below the RDA or the AIs, the adequate intakes, are not necessarily mean that an individual is deficient, but that the risk of deficiency is greater than if the individual consumed that amount of a nutrient. So the tolerable upper intake levels, this is more important than ever. That's called the ULs, and it is the maximum daily intake levels that are unlikely to pose risk of adverse health effects to almost all individuals in a given gender or life stage group. So the ULs, or upper upper intake levels is set well above the needs of everyone in the population and represents the highest amount of the nutrient that will not cause toxicity. So the concept of this is more might be good, but a lot more can cause a problem. And a lot of people take nutritional supplements that are 10, 50, 100 times the RDA, and you'll see that on the label. And what we do know is that at a certain point, nutrients can cause toxicity symptoms, and it is important not to take too much of a good thing. And we're going to learn a lot more about that as we move on in this class. And that was one of the reasons I asked, who does take supplements? Because dietary supplements and fortified foods can increase our risk of reaching those upper limits of where a supplement turns from good to toxic. And you're going to see some great movies and do some exercises that go into greater detail on the upper limits of nutrients. So this is a nice bell curve that shows the EARs, the RDAs, the upper limits, and what it's telling you is that DRIs recommend amounts of energy and the proportions of carbohydrate, fats, protein, vitamins, and minerals designed to keep our population healthy. So tools for diet planning. So what we've learned is the DRIs are very technical. They determine the recommended amounts of nutrients that are needed to keep individuals and populations through various life stages healthy, and they help determine where we're reaching a level of excess as well. So how do we take this information from the DRIs and put them into recommendations that the general population can understand to help plan diets that include all of these recommendations that anyone can follow? So these are done through public policy and guidelines, the dietary guidelines for Americans, and through MyPlate. So the dietary guidelines for Americans, you've probably heard a lot about them. They're a set of diet and lifestyle recommendations. They're designed to promote a healthy diet and reduce the risk of overweight, obesity, and chronic diseases in the U.S. population. And they're evidence-based. Thousands of studies are used to support these guidelines, and they're for ages 2 and older. And there are recommendations for different subpopulations, and they come out every 10 years. 2010 was the 7th edition, and you probably heard some recent information about the 2015 dietary guidelines, that they were being updated and revised. And even though they come out every 10 years, they do look at what are the trends and how the population is changing. And the 2015 analysis is going to go towards the revised 2020 guidelines. But we'll go into great detail of the 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans. So what's included in them? So the recommendations are balanced calorie intake with activity. So balance your calorie in with calorie out to help prevent obesity. Increases in fruits and vegetables, because we know that the population is not eating enough fresh fruits and vegetables to get a variety of vitamins and minerals needed every day. So the recommendation is 2.5 cups of fruits and vegetables a day, and goes even further to 3 to 5 servings. So select more fruits and fruit juices, and what you're going to learn is fruit juices are full of calories and low in fiber, and fresh fruits are less calories and more fiber. Eat a variety of vegetables and protein sources, so include beans, peas, fish, and to replace refined grains with whole grains. High-fat dairy products with low or no-fat dairy products, and fats with healthy oils, so saturated fats, solid fats, butter, lard, Crisco, those sorts of things, with healthy olive oils and all the different oils that are out there right now. The dietary guidelines for Americans also tell us what to limit our intake of. So I talked about limiting our intake of solid fats, saturated fats, trans fats, cholesterol, limiting our intake of sodium or salt, limiting our intake of too much sugar in our diet, and limiting our intake of refined grains, white breads, white rice, and limiting our consumption of alcohol. It's empty calories, it's not nutrient dense, it's not nutritious for us at all. So how are we doing on these as a country? Where's the temperature check on this? So our goal is to increase whole grains. We're not there yet, and we can see some public policies changing with whole grains being mandated to be part of school lunches. We're not meeting our recommendations for vegetables and fruit intake. We consume a lot of dairy, but it's not low-fat or non-fat dairy. Well, a lot more whole grain cheese or whole-fat cheeses and whole milk. If you're drinking that or eating those, you need to reduce that intake because it leads to high in saturated fat and leads to heart disease. Seafood, we're not meeting our recommendations. Less saturated protein sources to more nutritious protein sources and healthy seafood choices. And are we eating more of the healthy oils? And we're going to go into great detail. So what are we supposed to limit? So SOFAs, or saturated fatty acids, they come from solid fats and sugars. We're way over. Too much fat, too much sugar in our diet. Way over on calories, way over on salt and saturated fat. So as a country, we can see visually where we need to be, but we're not there yet. So healthy eating patterns, the recommendations for the dietary guidelines for Americans are a more healthier eating pattern, and the goals are suggested amount of foods from different food groups and sub-food groups. And what we're going to learn is that on labels, we're trying to get that information out to consumers. Choose more vegetarian variations. That helps populations meet some of those dietary guidelines because it's more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. So recommendations are out there everywhere. The DASH eating plan, if you haven't heard of that, that's to help lower high blood pressure, and it focuses on foods rich in potassium, calcium, and magnesium, and fiber, and lower fat dairy products, more fish, beans, nuts, seeds, and it's just a more healthful eating pattern. And probably lots of you have heard of the Mediterranean eating patterns. That particular one is based on fruits, vegetables, grains, olive oils, beans, nuts, seeds, and moderate portions of cheese and yogurt, lots of fish and seafood at least twice a week, poultry and eggs every few days, red meats and sweets less often. And that eating pattern has been shown to reduce heart disease and promote a healthy lifestyle. This is the healthy eating plate. The healthy eating plate emphasizes that a healthy diet is based on whole grains, fruits, vegetables, healthy protein sources, and healthy oils. The dietary pattern recommends limiting red meat, refined grains, and dairy, and avoiding sugary soft drinks, trans fats, and processed meats. People do well with a visual representation. This is from Harvard School of Public Health, and this is easy for someone to picture how their plate should look. A quarter of your plate should be whole grains like brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole grain pasta, healthy protein sources, so that's more fish, chicken, turkey, beans, nuts, limiting all those high saturated fat protein sources, plenty of fruits of all color, and the majority of your plate should be veggies. The more veggies, the greater the variety, the better. This means potatoes and french fries, they don't count. More water, healthy oils. So we can kind of visually look at this and say, this is how our plate should look. The MyPlate. So what does the MyPlate do more than the Harvard School of Public Health Healthy Eating Plate? Well, it was actually developed from that initial visualization. So MyPlate recommends proportions of foods that make up a healthy diet and offers some personalized food plans to determine the amounts from each food group that are appropriate for you. And this website, you're actually going to do your semester project using this website to evaluate your own diet and lifestyle and how you compare. So it balances calories. It talks about enjoying your food but eating less and avoiding oversized portions. You can see here the plate looks a little different than the previous plate. It is mostly vegetables and fruits, grains and protein, but it does include dairy. And it says foods to increase, make half your plate fruits and vegetables. That's easy to visualize. And make at least half your grains whole grains, and to switch from fat-free or low-fat to 1% milk. And I hope by the end of this course that all of you end up doing that. And foods to reduce, to compare the amount of sodium or salt in foods such as soup, breads, and frozen meals, and choose low-sodium food, and to drink water instead of sugary drinks. So this MyPlate icon shows what a balanced meal should look like, and it's based on the recommendations of the dietary guidelines that we've just been speaking about, and it shows some of the key messages to help consumers take that information, balance it, calories, and increase the nutrient density of their diet. The MyPlate food groups are similar to, remember earlier in the lecture we talked about the 5 food groups: grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy, and protein. That's what they were teaching in the 1940s and 1950s. So that concept is still here for many people to conceptualize. And also on the bottom there you can see it says find your balance between food and physical activity. So MyPlate is also incorporating physical activity, just not nutrition guidelines. And then it also gives some information and know your limits on fat, sugar, and sodium. How much should you be having of this a day to help prevent chronic diseases? MyPlate, like we said, is based on the dietary guidelines, and it is the USDA's most recent food guide. And again, it talks about the proportions of the 5 food groups and how most of your plate should be fruits and vegetables with only a portion for grains and proteins. So it's a different representation than the food guide pyramid. And you can see it emphasizes proportionality by visualizing that plate and how it should be shown. You can actually buy that plate and use that to eat. It emphasizes variety, including subgroups of vegetables, varied protein sources. We talked about those, different types of whole grains and fruit and dairy, and moderation in portion size, because variety, balance, and moderation is part of your discussion question this week. And it talks about increasing the nutrient density of food to help balance calories. The MyPlate has a daily food plan that goes along with it. So what it does, it talks about how much food you should eat from each food group, and it talks about portions and sizes and volumes. It can use ounces or cups or teaspoons, but along with this daily food plan, you can see that it always talks about physical activity. So here's an example of a 2,000 calorie menu. On the website, you can actually put in your information and it will give you meal plans based on, are you male or female, what life stage you're in, how physically active you are. So it'll show your daily food plan in a couple different ways. It'll tell you to make half your grains whole grains and how to do that. Give you a recommendation, talking about how often to choose seafood, how to avoid extra fat, add more vegetables, choosing fresh fruit, and skimming the fat off of your dairy products. So that includes yogurts and cheeses. So when we talk about all of this, we also need to talk about empty or discretionary calories. So those are calories from fat and sugar that don't have a lot of nutritional value, meaning no vitamins and minerals. All diets usually, for a healthy diet, either weight loss, weight gain, or weight maintenance, all dietary patterns include some sort of discretionary calories, and these are the calories that an individual takes in after they've met all of those DRIs, or what they needed for health and maintenance. And empty calories can come from a lot of different things. Soda is considered an empty calorie. Calories should be included in moderation, and we're going to talk a lot about what is an empty calorie and how much do we need. So here's a great picture. So this is a 2,000 calorie diet. So this shows that 1,740 of those calories were needed to meet the nutrient needs of this person to maintain their weight, but it also gives them a little freedom for empty calories. Donuts. We know that donuts don't have any nutritional value. They're full of fat and sugar, right? These look delicious, and probably a lot of people would say, oh, that looks so good. You're at a bakery and they have these wonderful fresh made donuts. Should I have them? Are they allowed in my empty calorie allowance or in my discretionary calories? So what should I eat? That's what everyone asks me. What do I need to eat? What should I eat? So my answers are balanced calories to maintain your weight. If you want to lose weight, you got to eat less calories and you got to move more. You need to increase foods that promote health. Are you eating healthy foods throughout the day? You might not be eating a lot of calories all day, but are you just eating junk all day? And you need to limit those nutrients that increase your health risk. You're young, you're old, it doesn't matter. What you eat now can be a predictor of your future health risk. And it also depends on many of those questions we asked at the beginning of this course. Exchange lists, what are those? Exchange list was a way to organize food by their portions of carbohydrate and fat and protein. Foods on this list can be used interchangeably. I always think of diabetic diets. They used to say you can have so many servings of carbs, fats, and protein, and it was a way to easily organize foods to control calories in moderation, and it sorted foods by the amount of nutrient intake, and they were originally developed for diabetics, and many nurses, many healthcare professionals, that we learned that a diabetic diet was a special diet using the exchange list, but we don't really use that anymore. Now we do carbohydrate counting, and we'll talk more in great detail, but exchange lists, it's important for you to know, especially if you're going to be a nurse, because you're going to hear a lot about that, and you're going to have this patient, they're going to be in the hospital, and the food nutrition department's going to send them a piece of cake and you're going to freak out because why are they getting cake? It's not part of a diabetic diet or their exchange list, but things have really changed as far as nutrition information, and we don't use this so often for diabetic diets. We count their carbohydrates. You're going to learn that in the carbohydrates chapter. So why is all this information important? Because food labels are showing us serving sizes. Here is a food and supplement name label. There's not a lot of information on those, but on food labels you're going to get a lot more information. This particular is a fish oil supplement, and what's required to be on there. They have the serving size or the recommended dose, the amount, name or quantity per serving, and all the ingredients need to be listed on a food panel or this food label. But food labels in general are designed to help consumers make healthy choices. There's information about the nutrients in a food and how it fits into the diet. And all packaged foods must have a nutrition facts panel and an ingredient list. So here's the nutrition facts panel. It's broken down into 4 separate areas here. The blue area is the standard serving size that's required to be on the label, so you can compare it to other products. The calories per serving are just below that. The food labels have to list their percent daily values, so that's the percent of total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbs, fiber, as well as in the green there, those are nutrients of concern. That's vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron, and those are on there. And really put this to your memory. The reason vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron are on a food label is because they tend to be low in the American diet. That means we don't get enough of them, and that is why they're on the food label. Total fat, cholesterol, and sodium, the ones in kind of the yellowy orange color, those are on the food label because we get too much of them. We get too much fat, saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium. So we need to reduce those nutrients in our diet. And the rest of it is just general information so that you can make healthful food choices. And you can see on the bottom there that the footnote gives the daily values for either a 2,000 calorie diet or a 2,500 calorie diet. And this tells you that if you're eating a 2,000 calorie diet, you should have a certain amount of fat, cholesterol, sodium, carb, and fiber in your diet. So what has to be on the nutrition facts panel? The serving size, servings per container, total calories from fat, and the percent daily values based on a 2,000 calorie diet. But not everybody needs a 2,000 calorie diet. I can tell you I don't. I would gain weight on a 2,000 calorie diet. So what you're going to learn through your semester project is how many calories do you need in your diet. So the FDA requires that the nutrition facts panel on food label presents information in 2 ways, so it gets a little confusing because people see the percent daily value on the right hand side and they think, is that how much I need? Am I above or below? So you're going to learn a little bit about the 520 rule that's going to help you with that in the video that you're going to watch. And what here it says the percent daily value is the reference values developed by the FDA specifically for the use on the food label. So that shows that if you were to eat a 2,000 calorie diet, that's the percentage of calories from this particular food that goes towards you meeting the goals for intake for all of those nutrients. Serving sizes. That's definitely something we want to talk about. The FDA determines the serving size for all foods, and labels must use the FDA serving size. So for beverages, 8 ounces is considered 1 serving size. So that super big gulp is more than 1 serving size. We don't want a manufacturer to be able to determine that a 1 liter bottle of soda is 1 serving size, and if you drink it, it's 1 serving. So the FDA has to determine a standard serving size for truth in labeling. Or an ice cream cup is 1 serving is half a cup. So if you're told you can have 3 servings of dairy products, a serving of ice cream is half a cup, not a whole container of ice cream. And this is important so that you can compare the serving size on the label to the amount you can actually consume. And serving sizes are not the same as the ones and use the USDA food guide. So sometimes you have to look at the food guide or the serving size on the label and compare it to what the recommendations are. Ingredient list, very important. It lists the contents in order from the most abundant to the least abundant based on weight. And it's required in all foods with more than one ingredient, and it's helpful for a lot of reasons, specifically for people with allergies or avoiding certain ingredients. For example, vegetarians that are avoiding animal products. Nutrient content claims. So can manufacturers claim that their food is a good source of fiber or rich in calcium? Can we believe them, or can they say whatever they want to say? So statements that are that highlight a nutrient of food of interest to consumers have to have a definition, and the Food and Drug Administration has established specific descriptors and specific requirements if they say they are a good source of fiber or they're rich in calcium, so that we can believe those statements and that it's meeting the minimum requirements behind that statement. So here is a great list, and this is in your book, of if it says it's free of something, the amount, if it's fat-free, cholesterol-free, sodium, sugar-free, what that really means, and how much of it, if it's low in something, lean and extra lean, if it's high in something. So if it's high or rich or an excellent source of, and you're going to hear that in the 520 video, is usually 20% or more of the daily value for a particular nutrient. So versus a good source is 10 to 19%. So when you're evaluating that label, use this chart, because you can tell me that your food is a good source of something, it's high in something, or it's less. Some things that contain 25% less than a nutrient can say that they're less fat than potato chips. Light, more healthy, fresh. So use this when you're evaluating your food label assignment this week. Health claims. So can we make health claims about food? So health claims are statements that refer to a relationship between a nutrient, its food, a component of the food, a supplement, and it says it reduces the risk of disease or a health-related condition. So food must be a naturally good source of one of six nutrients and can't contain more than 20% daily value for saturated fat, cholesterol. And all claims on food, not supplements, food, are reviewed by the FDA. So what are qualified health claims? These are ones that are actually supported by scientific evidence, or there is emerging evidence, and it's not well established. It can have a qualifying statement around it. So here's a health versus, an example of that is this health versus a qualified health claim. So here it says this is old-fashioned oatmeal made from 100% rolled oats, and its claim is that oatmeal helps reduce cholesterol. So does it? Should we believe this oatmeal? And the qualifying statement is oatmeal doesn't reduce cholesterol, but that the soluble fiber from the oatmeal eaten daily in a diet, low in saturated fat and cholesterol, made it reduce the risk of heart disease. So a good example of this is someone who has high cholesterol, goes and eats oatmeal every day for lunch, but then has a McDonald's supersized Big Mac and large fries and a jumbo Coke, probably just eating the oatmeal is not going to reduce their cholesterol, because the qualifying part of this statement is it helps reduce cholesterol along with a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol, which may help reduce the risk of heart disease. So when you see those statements, they're qualified. They may help do one thing along with other dietary factors. Dietary supplements. So let's talk a little bit about supplements, because I asked everybody, do you take supplements? And this is probably one of the most common questions I get. So dietary supplements, they're governed by law for foods, not drugs. They are required to have a supplement facts panel, as you can see, which was much less smaller than the nutrition facts panel on food. And they may also include some claims or health claims and some structure or functional claims. And what did these structure and function claims mean? So they don't require approval, but they've got to notify the FDA when they use some of these claims. They have to include disclaimers, so meaning if they're claiming something and the FDA hasn't evaluated the claim. And they do have to say that even though they say fish oil helps reduce your risk for heart disease, it is not intended to diagnose, to treat, to cure, or to prevent heart disease. And structure and function claims may appear on food labels but are not required to notify the FDA or include disclaimers. And the accuracy and truthfulness of claims is reviewed by the FDA. And when you look at your claim assignment this week, I want you to make sure you look up your supplement and Google it on the internet. Look it up on the FDA website that I put a link for. So does it have a claim that says low cholesterol? Well, that one requires FDA approval. Structure and function claim helps maintain normal cholesterol levels. See how that's different? That doesn't require approval. So does it or doesn't? Well, your guess is as good as mine. And that's it. That's the end of chapter 2. Be sure to do your 2 homework assignments this week. Watch the videos and go to the links and participate in the discussion forum.